everyone, Steve from Backcountry Gallery here, coming to you on location here. We're out with the Z8 taking some pictures, so we decided to stop and maybe do a quick video for you. I have some notes here, so forgive me for looking over there at them. But I wanted to let you know how it's going with the Z8 after just over a week of use, and in short, really well. I've been out shooting it almost on a daily basis, doing a lot of wildlife photography, sometimes with this 400 4.5 on here, this is a really nice combo. You're looking for something lightweight to carry through the woods, high performance, this is it right here. This has been great. But at any rate, the camera overall has been working really well for me. There are a few pros and cons. We're going to talk about those in the video, as well as things like, buffer performance, whether that SD card is a deal breaker or not. I'm going to talk about battery life, maybe a little bit of bad news there. And we're also going to talk about AF speed and performance compared to the Z9. So that's going to be towards the end, so make sure you stay with the video here. But before we get too far into it, again, I've been using this out in the field, and I've been really deep diving into the menus. And again, it's very much like a Z9. And the reason I've been deep diving so much is because I'm updating my Z9 guide, so it includes the Z8, because they're very, very similar. So if you want to get in on that, make sure you sign up for my free email newsletter at my site. That new publication is going to be out very, very soon, and it's a free update. So if you want to get in on it early, you can buy the book now, and you'll get that free update. So make sure you stop by the site, sign up for the newsletter so you know when it happens. So anyhow, let's talk about the Z8 a little bit more. So I have a few notes here. First, kind of my overall impressions of the camera, again, are very positive. I think, considering the price, this is just absolutely fantastic. It's a really nice size. From an ergonomic standpoint, I find it very, very comfortable to handle in the field. The buttons are very easy to access. Everything works really, really well. And it really is like shooting a smaller version of the Z9. In fact, when I'm in the viewfinder, I'm looking through it, it's hard to remember which camera I'm using, especially if I'm on a tripod, because the two cameras are so very similar. In fact, if you take a look at the grip itself, very, very comfortable. You see my pinky doesn't slide under it, it sits like this. But I did purchase the grip for it, I do have that coming, but I'm not sure how much I'm going to use it because the camera is very comfortable without it, and the grip makes it kind of even larger than a Z9. So I do like the compact size of this camera, especially with this paired with a smaller lens like this. It's great, but it works really well with the 600 and the 800 PF2. I do want to mention that I do have a video coming up. I've done all the programming. I set this camera up pretty much exactly like the Z9, and I do have a video coming out that's going to show you how that AF setup works, so make sure you hit subscribe so you see that video. It's not going to be in this one, but I will give you a video for my AF setup for this camera. I think you're going to like that. And as far as overall performance between this and the Z9, it's pretty much what Nikon tells you. They're identical. I have not detected any difference whatsoever. So let's start talking about some specifics. So I have a lot of stuff I see online, people asking me questions or wondering about, things like, again, buffers and AF performance. So let's get into some of that. So the first one is, I have a lot of people asking, is this the new D500? And I'm going to say yes and no. You can shoot this in DX mode, and it actually is very similar in size to a D500, but I feel like that kind of misses the point. I would definitely not buy this just to shoot it in DX mode. Not at all. I think the advantage with a camera like this is that you can shoot like 19.4 megapixel DX images, but you can also shoot full frame. So if you happen to be in a situation where the subject is close enough, you can use the full frame. Don't just stick to DX. But if you need to crop, you can still crop and get like a D500 quality shot from this camera, and you have all that in between space too. And that's how I like to use these cameras. Most of the time I am a fan of filling the frame. You guys know that if you watch my videos. But this does give you a lot of versatility there. So think of this as maybe like a D500 only with more versatility. Next is buffer. And that's a big one. That's caused a little bit of confusion and controversy. So I want to clear some of this stuff up. I've tested this against the Z9, and my Z9 is back from repair, by the way, and I was able to do some tests. But I did test the buffer exactly the same as the Z9. Basically what I do, I take my Delkin 256 gigabyte card, stick it in there, and I run the counter down to 0, the remaining frame counter down to 0, and I look at how many shots I have. And between the two of them, both of them are around 80 shots, 82 shots. So again, like Nikon says, and I don't think they're lying to us, the buffers are the same. Where you can get into trouble though, is if you're using that SD card overflow. And that's one thing I'm not a super big fan of. I have very mixed feelings on whether or not they should have gone with SD in there versus CF Express. I think CF Express would have been a better choice. It's kind of annoying to have two cards with you. But on the other hand, SD cards are more widely available, so if you're in a pinch someplace, you can probably get one from a gas station. That's not going to happen with a CF Express card. So, there are pros and cons to it, but overall, I think CF Express would have been a better choice here. And where that SD card really bite you is if you're using it as backup rather than overflow. Now mine is set to overflow. Okay, so if I have, and this leads me to another question. People have asked, hey, if you have your SD card set to overflow and the SD card is in there with the CF Express, does it affect the buffer? The answer to that is no. You only notice that buffer performance drop if you overflow onto the SD card. Once you're on the SD card, you'll know it because the buffer performance is going to go off the cliff. Now, if you're using any of the backup options though, or the JPEG plus RAW or stuff like that, then you're also going to feel a little bit of pain there with that SD card versus a CF Express because the SD card just isn't as fast. Your weakest link is definitely going to be the slowest card, and in this case the SD card is significantly slower than those faster CF Express cards. So that's one thing you do have to be aware of. For me as a wildlife photographer, I always say I've never had a wildlife subject come back and sue me because the shoot didn't go well, or because I lost shots. So I don't really worry about that too much. So mine is just set to overflow. Basically what I do, I put a gigantic 256 or 512 gigabyte Delkin black card in here and don't worry too much about overflowing. If I'm in some rare situation where I overflow, at least I have it, and then I can just pop another card in. To me, it's not like the end of the world or anything, but if you are using it in a backup capacity, it can be a problem. Next, let's talk about battery life. And battery life is one of those things that's maybe not ideal either here. We have the EN-EL15C in here, which isn't bad, but it lasts just under 2 hours, about an hour and 58 minutes in my tests. I have a little test that I do that's very consistent across cameras. So basically what I do is I put a little piece of tape over this and I shoot every 6 minutes or so. So kind of to simulate an actual shooting situation. I have the camera set so it doesn't go into standby, and then I time it. I've done this with the Z9. It was 4 hours and 23 minutes. With this camera, it's an hour and 58 minutes, which sounds okay, but it's not great. The A1 with a single battery actually goes almost an hour longer than this one does. So I feel like maybe we could have some improvement there somehow. I don't know. If you are going to use this like on an all-day shoot, I would definitely recommend extra batteries, or maybe that's when that grip comes in. And by the way, the grip, people have asked, can you put the EN-EL18 in that grip? And no, it's just for the EN-EL15s, these standard little guys here. Now the good thing with these, of course, is that you probably have some of these if you have other Nikon cameras. So, you know, at least there's that. But again, the battery life is not great. It's not terrible, but it's not great. So I would definitely put a few extra batteries in your pocket. And the other thing is, and I do this with all my mirrorless cameras, I shut it off a lot. Okay, if I'm in between shots, I'm waiting for, like I have a bird behind some bushes or something, I'm waiting for him to come back out, I shut the camera off, I don't leave it on. And that does wonders for preserving your battery life. And with the Z8 and the Z9 too, they both turn on instantly. It's just like on and off, on and off. So it's not like you're gonna have to wait for it to start up. Just turn it on and start shooting again. So that's what I've been doing. I've been very careful with whether the camera really needs to be on or not. So that's just something you can try to maybe extend that battery life a little bit, because I see a lot of people just kind of draining them for no reason. Another question is balance with long lenses. I've tried balancing this both with the 600 TC and with the 800 PF. Both work just fine. So there's no concern about whether or not this is going to balance on a gimbal with those longer lenses. Now in the 600 TC, I do have a larger foot. I'll put the name of the manufacturer below so you can check that out. But, and that works really, really well. I don't know that it was necessary though to make that balance, because the 800 PF balances just fine with its regular factory foot. Now let's talk about AF performance and AF speed, right? That's what you're here for, I'm sure. AF performance, as far as I can tell, seems identical to the Z9. I don't see any difference when I'm out there. It seems to grab onto the subject as well. It seems to stick with the subject as well. Everything seems exactly the same to me. I am not seeing any difference at all in AF performance. Now, granted, my Z9 just came back from repair, so I haven't been really shooting the two side by side, but I do have about 18 months experience with the Z9, as well as probably 250,000 photos with the Z9. So, you know, based on that background and based on using this, it just doesn't seem like there's any difference in performance with the AF system. Now, one question that's come up repeatedly though is, what about AF speed, right? Can the Z8 drive the focus motors as fast as the Z9? Because the Z9 uses the larger battery that provides more voltage, right? Well, I did some tests, and I'll put a slide up here that shows you my methodology, because it's kind of boring and I don't want to go through it for the next 5 minutes with you. So pause if you want to read that. Otherwise, the rest of us are going to go on to the result. So with the AF speed test with the 600 TC, both cameras were exactly the same, no difference whatsoever, and that is at 0.4 seconds to go from minimum focus distance all the way out to infinity. So, perfect there. So that's good for the 600, but what about an adapted lens like a 500 PF? So I put the FTZ2 adapter on the 500 PF, did the same tests, and I came up with the same results for both cameras again, from minimum focus distance to infinity, 0.45 seconds. So finally, I tried the 800 PF because the 800 PF uses a little bit different motor than the 600 TC. So I was like, okay, well, let's maybe try that. Interestingly, they're neck and neck. They're basically the same. But interestingly, the Z8 actually was just a fraction of a second quicker than the Z9. But I wouldn't read anything into that. The truth is, I'm shooting this out in the open environment, and it might have been just, a little bit of variance with, the breeze or heat distortion or who knows what. So I think any concerns about autofocus speed between the Z8 and the Z9, not a problem at all. As far as I can tell, AF performance and AF speed, absolutely identical. So that's pretty much it. I'm going to do a full review on the Z8, but in short, I think this is probably the best bang for the buck wildlife and nature camera that you can buy right now. I mean, based on the performance that it offers for the price point it gives you, it can do everything, not just wildlife. I mean, obviously it's a fantastic wildlife camera, no question about that at all. But if you want to do landscapes, yeah, this has your back. You want to do macros? Yeah, this has your back. That focus shift shooting thing in here, so fast, so fast. If you want to stack like frogs and stuff, this is your go-to. This is great. So I think any kind of nature photography, this is absolutely fantastic. But I'm going to go out on a limb, even though I don't shoot many other genres. I'm going to go out on a limb and say, I think for pretty much any kind of photography, this is going to be fantastic. Again, there are a few downsides. The battery life isn't the greatest. That SD card rather than the CF Express, again, not the greatest. But overall, I think when you talk bang for the buck, this is hard to beat. So that wraps it up. I hope that helps you with your Z8 questions. And remember, I am going to be updating the Z9 guide to include the Z8. Make sure you're on the email newsletter because that is coming out like really, really soon. Matter of fact, if the camera has launched, you can go to the site right now and buy that updated book. And as always, I hope you'll subscribe. Again, I have a lot more Z8 material coming, including an autofocus setup guide and a full review of the Z8. So make sure you subscribe for that. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Have a great day.